Welcome to Hidden Wounds. They inscribed the charity case in gleaming gold ink. I composed their downfall in utter silence. My name is Arthur. And now, at 62, I've come to understand that dignity, when wielded with precision, can be sharper and more devastating than any blade. It was on the night of my daughter's wedding that I realized some humiliations are so meticulously designed they serve as an invitation of their own. An invitation to demonstrate to people precisely who they have underestimated. The grand ballroom at the Crestwood estate was aglow with the sort of refined elegance that only carefully spent money can procure. Glistening crystal chandeliers threw shimmering patterns of light across the imported marble floors. Towering arrangements of white orchids, assembled with architectural precision, formed the backdrop for what should have been one of the proudest days of my existence. Instead, it became the day I learned my own daughter would stand idly by and permit her new family to tear me down for their own amusement. I had made my entrance wearing my grandfather's vintage gold watch and a bespoke navy tuxedo that conveyed quality without a hint of ostentation. My silver hair was impeccably styled, and my entire appearance was maintained with the care of a man who knew that in a world quick to dismiss older individuals, looking your best is both a shield and a statement. The groom, Landon Cavanaugh, sauntered toward the guest registration table with the easy confidence of a man who had never encountered a social setting he couldn't control. Trailing him were his parents, Sterling and Beatrice Cavanaugh, their faces alight with the eager pleasure of spectators about to enjoy a well-rehearsed spectacle. "Oh, Arthur," Landon declared, his voice projected just enough for the nearby photographer to capture the moment. "I had a very special name tag made just for you tonight." He brandished the elegant card with a theatrical gesture, its gold calligraphy shimmering under the chandelier light. It read, "The Charity Case." The laughter that followed was both instantaneous and vicious. Sterling's loud, booming guffaw, Beatrice's delicate, shrill giggle from behind her perfectly manicured hand, the photographer's poorly stifled chuckle. Even the wedding planner's practiced neutral facade broke into an unavoidable smirk. My eyes scanned the opulent ballroom, searching for my daughter Eleanor. I was hoping, with a desperate sort of foolishness, that she would step in, that she would recall the father who had raised her single-handedly after her mother passed away, that she would display even a shred of the loyalty I had dedicated 28 years to nurturing. But she turned her back, feigning a sudden and intense interest in something on her phone. That single moment seemed to freeze in time, crystallizing everything around me. Every sacrifice I had ever made rushed back to me. The second mortgage I took out to fund her Ivy League education, the substantial business loan I'd extended when her startup was on the brink of collapse, the generous sums I had provided for their lavish engagement party and rehearsal dinner. All of it was now diminished to a cruel joke, scripted in gold ink by a young man who had never known a day of real work in his life. I picked up the name tag. I studied it with the deliberate focus of an art connoisseur assessing a masterpiece. Then, with the precise, calculated motion of a chess grandmaster, I placed it face down at my assigned seat. "Thank you for so clearly defining our arrangement," I stated, my voice steady and resonant in the now hushed reception area. "How wonderfully transparent of you." I proceeded to the coat check, retrieved my overcoat, and walked to the valet stand. I did not rush. I did not create a scene. I denied them the satisfaction of the explosive emotional reaction they had so obviously craved. As I waited for my vehicle, I took out my phone and sent a single, coded text message to a contact labeled Trust Director. An hourglass emoji. The reply was immediate. Clock initiated. Awaiting execution order. I typed back a single word. Proceed. Behind me, the sounds of the reception resumed: the laughter, the chatter, the relieved murmurings of a crowd moving past an awkward moment, eager to pretend it never occurred. But it had occurred. And as I had learned long ago, consequences are much like compound interest. Given enough time, they grow exponentially. As my car pulled away from the Crestwood estate, a sense of clarity washed over me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in months. The charade was over. The years of tolerating subtle disrespect for the sake of a fragile family peace were finished. The Kavanaughs had finally revealed their true nature in a public forum. And now, it was my turn to reveal mine. The charity case was heading home to review his assets. The following day, their real education would commence. Money doesn't transform people. It simply reveals their true measure. I had taken their measure a very long time ago. Wednesday morning, I was in my home study, surrounded by the financial ledgers that narrated the true story behind the Kavanaugh family's opulent lifestyle. The documents revealed a stunning work of fiscal irresponsibility masquerading as affluence. It was precisely what I had anticipated when I first initiated my discreet inquiry into my daughter's future in-laws. The figures laid it all out in stark detail. The Kavanaughs needed a monthly income of $52,000 to sustain their way of life, yet their legitimate earnings seldom broke $34,000. The deficit was managed through a dizzying web of credit lines, property refinancing, and what they perceived as highly favorable terms with their business vendors, who had, for the past 2 years, become remarkably lenient. They were blissfully unaware that this leniency was a construct entirely of my own making. 18 months prior, when Eleanor had joyfully announced her engagement to Landon, I had commenced what I termed my due diligence on the family she was about to join. My investigation uncovered a family that had perfected the craft of living far beyond their income through a combination of charm, social maneuvering, and the shrewd cultivation of connections with individuals who possessed the resources they so desperately needed. Sterling's chain of upscale restaurants, while appearing prosperous, was a business teetering on the edge, kept afloat only by extended vendor credit and deferred loan payments. Beatrice's interior design business was little more than a vanity project, a shell company that generated just enough revenue to fund her extravagant shopping habits. Landon himself had never held a position that required him to be financially self-sufficient. They were, in essence, a family of sophisticated dependents, masters at projecting an illusion of wealth. I knew the pattern well from my years as a corporate lawyer specializing in acquisitions. Some people build fortunes. Others merely build the facade of one. The Kavanaughs were artists of the facade. And so, I had begun to strategically position myself. The Holmes Family Trust, through a shell corporation named Meridian Holdings, had quietly bought up Sterling's business loans. Their home mortgage was acquired from the original bank and restructured under another of my trust's subsidiaries. Even their dues at the exclusive country club were funneled through a payment processing company I secretly controlled. Most critically, I had structured Eleanor's business funding as a series of convertible notes, which contained very specific, non-negotiable trigger clauses. One such clause stipulated that if Eleanor ever permitted or participated in the public humiliation of the trust's primary beneficiary, myself, those notes would immediately convert to equity, granting me a controlling interest in her company. The wedding venue, the photographer, the caterer, the florist, I had contracted and paid for all of them, but I did so through agreements that included stringent moral conduct clauses. These stipulated that if the beneficiary of the trust was subjected to public ridicule or humiliation at the event, all payments would be reversed, and the vendors would be contractually obligated to seek immediate and full compensation from the responsible parties. I had genuinely hoped these measures would remain dormant, mere precautions against a worst-case scenario. I had hoped Landon would mature with marriage, that Sterling and Beatrice would come to appreciate the financial lifeline that sustained their lifestyle, that Eleanor would hold on to the core values I had spent her entire life instilling in her. Sunday night shattered those naive hopes. Now, as I scanned the overnight reports from my automated financial systems, I witnessed the flawless, cold precision of consequences unfolding just as I had designed. At 6:00 a.m., payment reversals were executed. Credit facilities were notified of defaults. Vendor contracts triggered their termination clauses. Banking systems flagged all associated accounts for immediate lockdown and review. By 7:00 a.m., the Kavanaughs would awaken from their champagne-fueled slumber to find that their entire world had been quietly repossessed. My phone began to ring at precisely 7:18 a.m. I let each call forward to voicemail, listening back with the dispassionate interest of a scientist observing a successful experiment. The escalating panic in their voices was exactly as I had envisioned. Apologies carry a different weight when they are motivated by hemorrhaging finances. At 7:18 a.m., Landon's voice, strained and cracking, came through my voicemail. "Arthur, something awful is happening. All of our honeymoon bookings are gone. The resort is saying our credit cards were rejected. The airline needs a new form of payment. I don't know what's happening. We're stuck at the airport and I'm starting to get scared. Please, Arthur, call me back." At 7:35 a.m., Sterling called, his typically arrogant tone replaced by a thin veneer of civility, barely concealing his panic. "Arthur, there seems to have been some sort of major banking foul-up. Our entire business line of credit has been called. Payroll is on Monday. My suppliers are all demanding cash up front, and I can't get a hold of anyone who can explain this. I know we've had our disagreements, but if you have any connections at the bank who could maybe—" I deleted his message before he could descend further into begging. At 8:12 a.m., the general manager of the wedding venue called my private line. "Mr. Holmes, this is David from the Crestwood estate. We've just received a notification that the payment for the Kavanaugh wedding has been clawed back, citing a violation of the morality clause. Our contract requires us to demand immediate payment from the signing parties, and if we don't receive it within 2 hours, we will be forced to pursue legal remedies for fraudulent inducement and the damage to our venue's reputation." Finally, at 8:47 a.m., Eleanor called. Her voice had the hollow, distant quality of someone trying to find privacy in a public restroom. "Dad, what did you do?" I answered on the fourth ring, settling into my favorite leather armchair with a fresh cup of coffee and the morning's financial news. "Good morning, Eleanor. I haven't done anything. I've merely stopped doing, but the business accounts are all frozen. The wedding vendors are saying the payments were reversed. Landon's credit cards are maxed out. Everything is collapsing." "And Eleanor?" I interjected, my voice calm and gentle. "Do you recall what transpired on Sunday evening?" There was a long, telling silence on the line. "Dad, I know Landon shouldn't have made that name tag, but—" "He didn't just make a name tag, my dear. He orchestrated a public spectacle designed to make me the butt of a joke in front of everyone who matters in your new life. His parents were enthusiastic participants, and you enabled it all with your silence. Did you truly believe an act of such calculated cruelty would be without consequence? It was just a dumb prank. He was stressed about the wedding. It was a calculated act of malice, delivered by someone who operated under the assumption that I was powerless to retaliate. He was, it turns out, gravely mistaken about my powerlessness. Dad, please. I know it was wrong, but to ruin our lives over, it seems, I am not ruining anything, Eleanor. I am simply refusing to continue financing a lifestyle that is predicated on disrespecting the very person who provides the financing. The consequences you are experiencing are the natural result of your own choices." The silence on her end stretched, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she began to grasp the true scale of the situation. "The business loans," she whispered, "were convertible notes that have now, as per the agreements you signed, converted. As of this morning, I own 62% of your company. The house was never theirs. Meridian Holdings has initiated foreclosure proceedings due to non-payment. They will have 10 days to vacate the premises." "Dad," her voice finally broke, the sound raw and broken. "We're sorry. Landon is sorry. We'll issue a public apology. We'll do anything to fix this. Just make it stop." "Eleanor, some things cannot be taken back. Some choices have permanent repercussions, and some relationships cannot withstand certain betrayals. On Sunday, in front of 200 people, you chose your husband's cruel entertainment over your father's dignity. Today, you are simply living with the outcome of that choice." I ended the call and promptly blocked her number. At 10:00 a.m., a text message arrived from an unrecognized number. "This is Landon. Please, I'm begging you. We had no idea. We thought you were just being generous because you loved Eleanor. We didn't realize you controlled everything. We will do whatever it takes to make this right." I typed a one-word response. No. Some apologies are born from genuine remorse and deserve a hearing. Others are simply frantic reactions aimed at restoring a lost advantage. The Kavanaughs' sudden, profound understanding of my generosity, timed perfectly with the implosion of their finances, told me everything I needed to know about their sincerity. They weren't sorry for humiliating me. They were sorry for humiliating someone who could retaliate so completely. The distinction was critical, and it was final. Perfection is a costly endeavor. Contempt, however, carries an additional surcharge. Tuesday ushered in a procession of commercial vehicles to the Kavanaugh estate. Each one carried a vendor with an official notice and a demand for immediate payment for services they had mistakenly believed were secured by another's wealth. I spent the morning in my garden, pruning my rose bushes, while my property manager provided me with real-time updates. The photographer was the first to arrive. He explained to a distraught Landon that he was contractually forbidden from releasing any wedding photos without the explicit consent of the contract holder, the Holmes Family Trust. That consent, he informed him, had been formally and irrevocably withdrawn due to a documented violation of the Moral Conduct Clause. "But those are our memories, our wedding photos." Landon's voice, shrill with disbelief, carried across the perfectly manicured lawn, drawing the discreet attention of neighbors peeking from behind their curtains. "Sir, the contract is ironclad," the photographer stated calmly. Payment was conditional upon the respectful treatment of the beneficiary. That condition was breached, and as a result, the trust has rescinded authorization for image release. 30 minutes later, the caterer arrived. He wasn't there to collect a debt, but to inform Sterling that all of his restaurant supply contracts had been terminated, effective immediately, due to cross-default provisions in his agreements. The same line of credit that had propped up his failing business was now in default, and every single one of his supplier contracts was linked to that financial stability. 12 years, Sterling bellowed into his phone, likely at some unfortunate customer service representative. "I've been a loyal customer for 12 years. You can't just cut me off over a single missed payment." But they could, and they had. I had meticulously woven their financial dependencies together, creating a web where a single default would trigger a catastrophic cascade across every facet of their lives. At noon, the florist team arrived to repossess the high-end rental items still adorning the Kavanaugh's grand entryway. Massive crystal vases, elaborate silk flower arrangements, and the ornate archway that had served as the backdrop for their wedding photos. The process was efficient and deeply humiliating, conducted in the full light of day as neighbors captured the spectacle on their smartphones. "This is nothing but harassment," Beatrice shrieked as workers carefully loaded the expensive decor onto their truck. "We will sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress." The florist's manager, a seasoned professional accustomed to dealing with difficult clients, simply handed Beatrice a copy of the rental agreement. "Ma'am, all items were rented through the home's family trust. The contract includes standard moral conduct provisions. The triggering event was documented by witness statements and the venue's security footage. We are simply recovering our property as per the legally binding terms of the agreement." By that evening, the local news affiliate had caught wind of the story. I hadn't contacted them, but public foreclosure filings are a matter of public record. The dramatic narrative from a fairy tale wedding to a sudden eviction in under 48 hours was an irresistible piece of human interest drama. A young reporter, who seemed to relish the downfall of the wealthy, was soon interviewing neighbors about the shocking reversal of fortune for one of the community's most prominent families. "It's just unbelievable, Mrs. Gable from next door told the camera, her face a mask of feigned sympathy. On Sunday, they were the talk of the town, hosting the wedding of the year, and today they're being forced out of their home. It's a tragedy, but I did hear there were some family issues that spiraled out of control." Family issues. Such a delicate euphemism for public cruelty and the systematic ruin it had brought upon them. That night, my attorney called. "Arthur, I just wanted to offer my congratulations on the flawless execution of your contingency strategy. Every single contract has held up under scrutiny. Those moral conduct clauses were a stroke of genius." "Thank you, William," I replied. "I've always believed in preparing for every eventuality." The Kavanaugh's lawyer called my office this afternoon, fishing for settlement options. I informed him there was nothing to settle. Contractual violations triggered legal consequences, and all actions were proceeding according to the documented agreements. And what was his response? He hung up on me. I imagine they're starting to realize that moral outrage is not a recognized legal defense against a documented breach of contract. I slept soundly that night, comforted by the knowledge that the Kavanaughs were finally learning the crucial difference between charity and entitlement, between generosity and obligation, and between being supported and being owned. They had dared to call me a charity case, mocking the very concept of dependence. Now they were about to discover what true dependence felt like when the entire support structure vanishes overnight. I loved my daughter enough to want her to become a responsible adult. She, however, loved her comfort too much to ever stop being a child. Thursday morning, Eleanor appeared on my doorstep. She looked as though she hadn't slept since our phone call 2 days prior. Her normally pristine appearance was gone, replaced by a wrinkled blouse, an unshaven face, and the haunted, desperate look of someone who has just realized they've made a catastrophic and irreversible error. I answered the door wearing a crisp dress shirt and my father's heirloom cufflinks, my appearance meticulously composed to highlight the chasm between one who commands his circumstances and one who is a victim of them. "Dad, please, can we talk?" I observed her face for a long moment, taking in the dark circles beneath her eyes and the slight tremble in her hands. "Of course, Eleanor, we're talking right now. I mean inside, privately, about what's happening. To the business, to Landon's family, to everything. Eleanor, there is nothing private about your situation any longer. You made your choices in a very public forum, And now you are facing the consequences in a very public manner. It seems only fitting, she winced, as if I had struck her. Dad, I know what happened on Sunday was terrible. I should have stood up for you. I should have told Landon not to make that name tag. I was caught off guard. You weren't caught off guard, Eleanor, I corrected her gently. You were caught being yourself. A crisis doesn't build character, it reveals it. And when it mattered, you chose your husband's approval over your father's dignity. That wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. That was a clear statement of who you are. I reached into my briefcase and retrieved a folder of documents I had prepared on Monday. Your business funding was provided through convertible notes that contained specific trigger conditions. Your complicity in my public humiliation activated the conversion clause. I now own a controlling interest in your company. Her face drained of all color as I handed her the official paperwork. You are removed as CEO, effective immediately. I have already appointed an interim management team to oversee operations while I decide the company's future. Your salary has been suspended. Landon's consulting contract has been terminated. Your health insurance will continue for the time being, because I am not a monster. But your authority, your control, ends today. Dad, you can't do this. It's my company. I built it. You built it with my capital, Eleanor. An investment I made under the assumption that you had absorbed the values I worked so hard to teach you. Sunday night proved that assumption was fundamentally flawed. That's when the tears started. Not the calculated, manipulative tears of someone trying to sway a decision, but the gut-wrenching sobs of a person who has finally comprehended the true magnitude of what they have lost. I can't support Landon and the baby without the business, she choked out. I'm pregnant, Dad. Your grandchild is going to suffer because of one stupid mistake. My grandchild, I said, my voice even, will be raised by parents who are learning, perhaps for the very first time, that actions have consequences and that respect is not an entitlement. That may prove to be the most valuable inheritance I could ever provide. I closed my briefcase, signaling the end of our conversation. My house, which I own free and clear, is a place no one can take from me through cruelty or ingratitude. Eleanor, I will always love the daughter I raised. But love without respect is merely enabling, and I have enabled your poor judgment and your husband's arrogance for the last time. When you are ready to become the woman I raised you to be, instead of the child your husband married, you can have your attorney contact mine. Until then, it is time you learn to solve your own problems. Dad, can't we just try to find a solution? Some kind of middle ground? I looked at her one last time. This child for whom I had sacrificed everything. This adult who, when faced with a true test of character, had chosen convenience over integrity. We are finding a solution, I said calmly. This is what the solution looks like. I went back inside and locked the door, leaving her standing alone on the porch where I had once waited for her to come home from school, from dates, from triumphs and failures. Where I had always believed that my unconditional love would be enough to forge character in another human being. Some lessons, it turns out, can only be taught through profound loss. Some personal growth can only begin when the safety net is finally removed. Daniel was about to get a masterclass in both. They labeled me a charity case. I sent them a foreclosure notice. Friday morning broke with a crisp, clear sky, the kind of weather that lends an air of inevitability to dramatic events. I dressed in a fine wool suit and positioned myself in a small park across the street from the Kavanaugh estate. From there, I could observe the day's events with the dispassionate interest of a director watching his play unfold. At precisely 9:30 a.m., 3 vehicles turned into their sweeping circular driveway. A sheriff's department cruiser, a process server's car, and a large moving truck from an estate liquidation company. The timing was impeccable, late enough for the entire neighborhood to be alert and watching, yet early enough to precede the start of the business day for anyone who might attempt to intervene. Sterling answered the door, still in his bathrobe, his usual air of authority completely deflated, replaced by a dazed confusion. Behind him, Beatrice hovered in a designer silk nightgown, and Landon clutched a robe that likely cost more than a month's rent for an average family. The sheriff stepped forward with the detached efficiency of a man who had overseen this procedure hundreds of times. He presented Sterling with an official document as the process server began to read from a clipboard in a clear, formal tone that marks the transition of a personal crisis into a legal proceeding. Sterling Kavanaugh, Beatrice Kavanaugh. By order of the Superior Court and pursuant to foreclosure proceedings, you are hereby notified that this property has been sold to satisfy outstanding debts. You are required to vacate the premises and remove all personal belongings within 72 hours. This is our home. Sterling's voice cracked. We've lived here for 18 years. Sir, the sheriff replied patiently, according to the mortgage documentation, this property is owned by Meridian Holdings. They have legally exercised their right to foreclose due to non-payment and a breach of loan covenants. The sale was conducted in accordance with state law, and the new owner has requested immediate possession. As the moving crew began unloading packing materials, Landon started screaming questions that no one was legally obliged to answer. Where were they supposed to go? How could this happen so fast? Wasn't there an appeals process? The answers were simple and brutal. They would go wherever they could afford. It happened quickly because they had ignored the numerous legal notices, and an appeal required legal grounds, not just a desperate hope that consequences could be negotiated away. It was at that moment I chose to make my appearance. I crossed the street with a calm, unhurried gait, carrying a small gift bag tied with a silver ribbon, the very same bag I had intended to give Landon as a wedding gift before he cast me as the evening's entertainment. Landon, I called out as he stood weeping on the front steps. He looked up, his face a mess of tears and shock. I handed him the gift bag with the same polite smile I had worn when presenting him with engagement gifts and other tokens of affection, all of which had been accepted as his due. Inside the bag were two items. The first was the original name tag, the charity case, now professionally mounted in a sterling silver frame. The second was a cashier's check for $2,400 made payable to Charity Case, LLC. For the charity case, I said softly, my voice just loud enough for the sheriff and the process server to overhear. I thought it was only fair, since that is apparently my designation. Enough for a security deposit and the first month's rent on a modest apartment. Landon's face cycled through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, dawning recognition, raw fury, and finally, the broken, hollow understanding of a man who realized he had been checkmated in a game whose rules he never even knew existed. He let out a scream, a primal sound of rage and helplessness that echoed across the manicured lawns of a neighborhood where such displays were unheard of. He then hurled the framed name tag onto the driveway, where it shattered on the very spot he and Eleanor had posed for their engagement photos. But he kept the check. The entire sordid scene was captured on the cell phones and home security cameras of a dozen neighbors, creating a viral moment of infamy that would shadow the Kavanaughs for years to come. The entitled groom, screaming at law enforcement while clutching a handout from the man he had publicly mocked. I watched the frame shatter with a sense of genuine pity, not for the object, but for the fact that Landon chose to destroy the evidence of his own folly rather than learn from it. Some people, I murmured to no one in particular, never grasp the value of the things they break. By nightfall, The Kavanaugh estate was deserted, the silence broken only by the wind rustling through the trees. All that remained was the glittering dust of shattered glass on the driveway. I drove back to my quiet, peaceful house, a home where no one questioned my judgment or took my generosity for weakness. The charity case was home. The people who had coined the term were now learning the true meaning of the word. Only the unprepared resort to lawsuits and outrage. The prepared have already drafted the legal response to the outrage in advance. Monday morning, I learned the Kavanaughs had filed for an emergency injunction, alleging defamation, tortious interference, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Their new lawyer, it seemed, had convinced them that their sense of indignation was a viable substitute for a sound legal argument. I read their court filing with the detached amusement of someone who had been anticipating this exact move. Desperate individuals often cling to the belief that the legal system is a tool for rescuing them from the consequences of their own actions, especially when they have never been held truly accountable for anything in their lives. My legal team had been drafting our counterfiling since the Sunday of the wedding. We arrived at the courthouse on Tuesday morning, armed with 4 heavy briefcases of evidence. The original, signed contracts with their explicit moral conduct clauses, email correspondence, demonstrating their foreknowledge of the planned humiliation, sworn affidavits from wedding guests, high-definition security footage from the Crestwood estate capturing the entire name tag incident, and all the loan agreements with their clearly articulated default triggers. Judge Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 70s with a formidable reputation for slicing through legal theatrics, presided over the hearing. She read the Kavanaugh's filing with an expression one might reserve for a poorly written piece of fiction. Their attorney, a young, theatrical man who favored emotional appeals over legal precedent, launched into a passionate tirade about vindictive old men and disproportionate responses to harmless wedding jokes. Judge Morrison allowed him to finish his performance, then posed a single case-ending question. Counselor, can you present any evidence that the contracts your clients willingly signed were in any way fraudulent, unconscionable, or otherwise legally invalid? Well, no, Your Honor. But the moral conduct clauses are surely excessive. And did your clients read these contracts before they signed them? I believe so, but you believe so? Did your clients have legal representation when they entered into these substantial financial agreements? Yes, but... And did Mr. Holmes fulfill all of his contractual obligations up until the moment of the documented triggering event? A long, heavy silence filled the courtroom as the young attorney realized his entire case was disintegrating before his eyes. Yes, Your Honor. Then, Counselor, on what conceivable legal grounds are you petitioning this court to nullify contracts that were entered into freely, executed properly, and triggered legitimately by your own client's documented behavior? There was no answer, because no valid answer existed. The Kavanaughs had signed clear agreements, publicly violated those agreements, and were now seeking judicial intervention to escape the entirely predictable consequences. Judge Morrison denied their request for an injunction and sternly advised them to reconsider their legal strategy before they faced court sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Furthermore, she added, glancing at the financial documents submitted as evidence, I am referring your client's business records to the state's Financial Crimes Division for a full review. The significant discrepancies between their claimed assets and their actual liabilities suggest potential fraud that requires a formal investigation. Outside the courthouse, the Kavanaugh's lawyer promptly abandoned them on the steps, clearly unwilling to further tarnish his career on a meritless case involving clients with questionable financial dealings. Eleanor approached me as I was about to get into my car. Dad, Landon's 7 months pregnant. Even if you hate us, Don't you want to be a part of your grandchild's life? I looked at this woman who still seemed to believe that biology automatically confers obligation, that a pregnancy can erase accountability, that the announcement of an impending birth could somehow negate an act of public cruelty. "Eleanor," I said, "I sincerely hope your child learns to treat people with more decency than its parents have shown. But that particular lesson will have to come from someone other than me." What is that supposed to mean? It means that some bridges, once you have burned them to the ground, cannot be rebuilt. Some trust, once shattered, can never be restored. She began to weep again, finally understanding that this was not a temporary fit of anger that would subside over time, but a permanent severance based on a fundamental divergence of character that had been irrevocably exposed. "I didn't choose him over you," she whispered. I didn't know what to do." "Knowing what to do," I replied, "would have meant protecting your father from public humiliation. You chose instead to enable it. That choice told me everything I need to know about the person you have become." I walked away, leaving her on the courthouse steps, surrounded by the wreckage of a lawsuit that had only succeeded in making their dire situation infinitely worse. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others simply repeat them, blaming everyone but themselves for the inevitable outcome. Eleanor and the Kavanaughs were firmly in the latter category. When you cut off the source of oxygen, the first thing to go is the sound, followed closely by the light. The social ostracization began subtly, as it always does in communities where reputation is currency and social standing is paramount. It started with a politely worded email from the Harbor Club, where the Kavanaughs had been members for over a decade, and where Sterling had once held a prestigious position on the membership committee. The message was diplomatic, but its meaning was unambiguous. Due to recent legal entanglements and documented financial irregularities, their membership was suspended indefinitely. Similar notices soon followed from every organization where the Kavanaughs had once wielded influence: the Children's Hospital Auxiliary, the Arts Council, the Historical Society. This wasn't because I had made calls to have them excluded, it was because these institutions are self-preserving. They instinctively distance themselves from members whose behavior becomes a liability or a source of public embarrassment. The story of the wedding name tag had spread through their social circles like wildfire. People who had either witnessed my humiliation firsthand or heard the lurid details from others were quietly reevaluating their association with a family capable of such calculated cruelty. Sterling's restaurant suppliers began to sever ties, deciding that a client with a history of payment defaults was a risk they were no longer willing to take. His applications for emergency business loans were summarily rejected by the very banks that had once courted his business. Landon's meticulously crafted social media persona crumbled. Friends and followers stopped engaging with his posts about their family difficulties and temporary housing challenges. The aspirational influencer lifestyle he was trying to build was impossible to maintain while living in a sparsely furnished rental and being seen at discount grocery stores. Most effectively, every attempt they made to secure new financing was systematically thwarted by my quiet acquisition of their defaulted assets. Every potential escape route they found ultimately led back to a financial instrument that I controlled through a network of shell companies they had never even heard of. I had become the silent, unseen architect of the financial labyrinth that had slowly enveloped their entire world, and they were only just beginning to comprehend the extent of their entrapment. The apex of their social demise occurred at the Museum Foundation's annual Spring Gala, an event I had been a major patron of for 15 years. Beatrice had once chaired the silent auction committee with an air of self-importance that suggested her volunteer work was indispensable to the city's cultural life. I arrived wearing a sharp tuxedo with my father's diamond studs, took my seat at my reserved table by the podium, and observed as people who had once clamored for the Kavanaughs' attention now actively avoided them with the polite, practiced aversion reserved for social pariahs. During the cocktail hour, Beatrice approached my table with the desperate boldness of someone with nothing left to lose. "Arthur, surely we can resolve this like civilized adults. What happened at the wedding was unfortunate, I admit, but to destroy our entire social standing over it seems vindictive." I looked up from my conversation with the museum's director, noting how the stress of the past 3 months had aged her. "Beatrice, I haven't destroyed a thing. I have simply stopped pretending that people who publicly humiliate me are entitled to my resources or my social connections. The consequences you're experiencing are of your own making. But we can change. We can apologize, make amends." "You can certainly do all of those things," I agreed. "But amends do not automatically restore trust, and apologies do not erase consequences. Some lessons can only be learned through hard experience." Her eyes welled up with tears as the finality of her situation seemed to dawn on her. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no return to the comfortable, subsidized life they had so carelessly taken for granted. Before she could cause a scene, museum security gently approached and escorted her from the building with the quiet firmness reserved for those who no longer belong. As the gala continued around me, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. I had not only survived a public humiliation, but I had emerged from it stronger and more respected than ever before. The charity case was dining with the pillars of the community. The people who had mocked him were now learning the true meaning of powerlessness. I didn't want their house. I wanted their certainty. The public auction of the Kavanaugh estate took place on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. It was held on the courthouse steps, as foreclosure laws make no provision for sentimentality or regret. I arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a tailored black overcoat, and positioned myself among the small group of real estate investors who had come to bid on distressed properties. The auctioneer was a man who had seen it all. He had presided over the sale of thousands of family homes and had learned to conduct his business with a professional, detached air. He read the property description in a monotonous drone. Colonial Revival, 800 square feet, guest house, pool, 2 acres of established gardens, bidding to commence at $420,000. I had been inside that house on dozens of occasions for family events where I was tolerated rather than welcomed. I knew every detail: the imported Italian marble in the foyer, the custom woodwork in the dining room, the master suite where Sterling and Beatrice had plotted their social conquests. More importantly, I knew precisely what they owed, the true market value of the property, and exactly how much I was willing to pay to own the ultimate symbol of their former arrogance. The bidding started slowly. A few local investors made tentative offers. A young developer was busy scribbling calculations in a notepad. I remained silent as the price climbed past $450,000, then $480,000, and then stalled at $515,000. It was then that I finally raised my hand. $550,000, I said, my voice clear and firm. The other bidders turned to look at me, their curiosity piqued. An elegantly dressed older gentleman was not the typical buyer at these events, but they recognized the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. $560,000, the developer called out. $600,000, I countered without a moment's hesitation. The developer shook his head and stepped back, conceding defeat. The auctioneer called for any further bids, but there were none. Going once at $600,000. Going twice, sold to bidder number 7. I wrote out a cashier's check for the full amount and received the deed to a property that I had, in effect, been financing for the past 2 years. Later that day, I was informed that the Kavanaughs had watched the entire auction from a rented car parked down the street. They had witnessed their family home, the very foundation of their social identity, sold to a stranger for less than they owed. They had no idea that the stranger was the charity case they had so gleefully humiliated just 8 months earlier. Over the subsequent weeks, I oversaw a complete renovation of the property. Their ostentatious and gaudy decor was replaced with a style that reflected my own values. The ballroom where Landon had mocked me was transformed into a serene library. The formal dining room, the site of countless passive-aggressive remarks, became a sun-drenched conservatory filled with plants. Most symbolically, I converted Sterling's home office, the nerve center of his failed business ventures, into a peaceful art studio where I could finally resume the painting I had given up years ago to support my family. I wasn't erasing their memory. I was replacing their pretension with purpose. Once the renovations were complete, I hosted a housewarming party. I invited old friends who had witnessed the Kavanaughs' behavior with quiet disapproval, and neighbors who had always treated me with dignity, even when my own family had not. "This house feels completely different now, Arthur," my neighbor Dorothy remarked during a tour. "It's elegant, but not flashy. It feels like you." "Thank you," I replied. It's amazing how much more peaceful a home can be when it's occupied by people who understand the difference between confidence and arrogance. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. "Drove by the house tonight. It looks beautiful. Hope you're happy there." I didn't reply, but I knew it was Eleanor, still monitoring my life from the safe distance I had created. The charity case now owned the castle. The former monarchs were now living in exile. Forgiveness is a luxury, and it is one I do not owe. 1 year and 3 months after the wedding that irrevocably severed the bond with my daughter, I stood in my transformed home, preparing to host an event that would serve as the final chapter in this lesson of consequences. The guest list was carefully curated. Business leaders who had observed the Kavanaughs' downfall with a certain professional appreciation, artists, and community members who understood that some celebrations are not about joy, but about justice. I dressed in a midnight blue velvet dinner jacket. At 63, I had never felt more confident or more in command of my own life. The past year had not aged me. It had refined me. Success had imbued me with a presence that commanded respect. The official reason for the party was to celebrate the renovation of the house. The unofficial reason was to make a definitive statement. Some relationships cannot be salvaged, and some actions cannot be forgiven. Guests began to arrive at the house that had once been a monument to the Kavanaughs' social climbing and was now a testament to my values of quiet elegance. They marveled at the changes. The ballroom was now a gallery showcasing local artists. The dining room, once a theater for social maneuvering, now hosted lively conversations among people who valued intellect over insincerity. Eleanor arrived at 9:00 p.m., alone. She stood in the entryway, looking like a stranger in a place she had once considered her own. She looked older, worn down by a year of facing real-world responsibilities without a financial safety net. I acknowledged her with a polite nod, the kind one gives to a distant acquaintance, not a child. She approached me during a lull in the evening. "Dad, the house. It's really beautiful." "Thank you. I wanted to let you know. Landon had the baby, a girl. We named her Grace." I felt a faint flicker of something not joy, but a sad acknowledgement that life moves on even when relationships do not. "I hope she is healthy. She's perfect, beautiful, like her grandfather." The compliment was a calculated attempt to find an opening for the reconciliation she still seemed to think was possible. "I hope her parents teach her to treat people with respect," I replied. "That will serve her far better than beauty ever could." She flinched, the implication hitting its mark. "Dad, isn't there any way we can—" "No, Eleanor," I said firmly. "There is not." She left shortly after, finally understanding that my civility in public was not an indication of forgiveness, but merely a social necessity. At 10:00 p.m., I noticed 3 figures standing on the public sidewalk across the street, just outside the wrought iron fence that now secured my property. It was Sterling, Beatrice, and Landon, holding a baby. They were watching the celebration, outsiders looking in at a world they could no longer access. I raised my wineglass in their direction, a silent toast to their hard-won education. Then I turned my back on them and returned to my guests, people who understood that respect must be earned, that kindness is not weakness, and that cruelty always, eventually, comes with a price. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, bringing the evening to a close, "thank you for being here tonight. This house has been many things to many people. Tonight, it has finally become what it was always meant to be. A home filled with people who understand that dignity is non-negotiable." As the last guest departed, I walked through the quiet halls of my house, truly my own in every sense of the word. I felt the profound satisfaction of a man who had refused to be diminished. In my study, I opened a drawer. Inside was a single framed object, the original name tag, with "The Charity Case" inscribed in gold ink. It was not a reminder of their cruelty, but of my own resilience, not of what they tried to take from me, but of what I had reclaimed for myself. Not a symbol of forgiveness, but of consequences, perfectly and justly applied. They intended it as a mockery. Instead, they gave me the motivation to show them what real power looks like. Some stories end with forgiveness and reconciliation. This one ends with dignity restored and boundaries permanently enforced. The charity case had taken his rightful place, and he would never relinquish it again. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of standing up for your own worth, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Share it with anyone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to rewrite your own story and demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening.